The photographer can stay on the platform, but the divers, no more diving. We're going to start competition for men and women 3-meter board synchro. First team on the board, Thibaut and Noah. Execution 6.5, 6, 5.5, 5.5. For synchro 7.5, 8, 7.5, 6.5, 6.5. Aiden and Nika. For execution 5, 4, 2.5, 5. For synchro 4.5, 6, 4, 3, 4.5. Emma and Luca. For execution 7, 6.5, 5.5, 6. For synchro 7.5, 7, 7, 7, 7. Sophia en Clara. For execution 7.5, 6, 5.5, 6.5. For synchro 7.5, 7, 7, 7.5, 7. Round 2, Thibaut and Noah. For execution 7, 7.5, 6.5, 7. For synchro 7.5, 7.5, 8, 8, 8. Aiden and Nika. Execution 4.5, 4.5, 4.5, 6.5. For synchro 6, 5.5, 6, 6, 5.5. Emma and Luca. execution, 5.5, 5, 4.5, 5.5. For synchro, 6, 5.5, 4.5, 5, 5. Sophia en Clara. For execution, 6, 7, 6.5, 6. For synchro, 7.5, 6.5, 7, 7, 7. Round 3, Thibaut and Noah. For execution, 6, 5.5, 5, 7. For synchro, 6.5, 6.5, 7, 6, 6. Aiden and Nika. For execution, 6, 5.5, 5.5, 5.5. For synchro, 6, 6, 7, 6.5, 5.5. Emma and Luca. For execution, 6.5, 6, 5, 6. For synchro, 6, 6, 6, 6.5, 5.5. Sophia en Clara. For execution, 5.5, 6, 6.5, 6.5. For synchro, 6.5, 6.5, 6.5, 6.5, 7. Round 4, Thibaut and Noah. Execution, 6.5, 6.5, 4, 5.5. For synchro, 6, 7, 7, 6.5, 6.5. Aiden and Nika. execution 5, 5, 5.5, 6. For synchro 6, 6, 5.5, 5, 6. Emma en Luca. For execution 5.5, 5, 6, 5. For synchro 6, 6, 6, 5.5, 6. Sophia en Clara. For execution 6, 6.5, 4, 5.5. For synchro 6, 6.5, 6, 5, 6. Round 5. Thibaut and Noah. For execution 6, 5.5, 6.5, 6.5. For synchro 7, 6.5, 7, 7, 7. Aiden en Nika. Execution 4.5, 3.5, 5.5, 5.5. For synchro 6, 5, 5.5, 5.5, 5.5. Emma en Luca. For execution 5, 4.5, 5, 5. For synchro 5.5, 6, 5.5, 6, 5.5. Sophia en Clara. For execution 6.5, 6, 7, 5.5. For synchro 7, 6.5, 6, 6.5, 7.5. Round 6. Thibaut and Noah. execution, 3.5, 3, 4.5, 5. For synchro, 5, 4.5, 4, 5.5, 4. This was the last dive in this competition. Thank you, judges. Thank you, secretaries. Next competition will be the last competition in this weekend, and it will be the team event. So now there is some training time for the team event. The judges for the team event will be judge number 1,